there. Welcome to the More Miles podcast. I'm Lauren,
I'm Michelle.
And I'm Scott.
and we are the More Miles Run Coaching team. Today, our podcast is going to be all about race week. So let's just dive right into it. Race week preparations and what to expect, what to do, what not to do. We're going to cover all of it in this episode.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to start with leading up to race week and the taper, and maybe Lauren, I don't know if you want to kind of explain to us what a taper is and why we do it, and that's kind of where our race starts.
Yeah. So typically your taper is starting prior to race week. Maybe in rare circumstances, you have just that 1 week of taper time leading up to your race. But we are assuming that what we're talking about here is your goal race for the season or for the year or what have you, the A race that you have been training for. So a taper is literally, you have been training at a higher volume. You've been including a lot of intensity in your sessions. Taper is literally tapering that down, reducing the volume that you're doing, reducing the volume of intensity that you're doing. So we have been putting fatigue, building fatigue on your body. Your taper is a chance to gradually cut down that load in order to give your body the opportunity to recover. Now, it doesn't mean that we're jumping into full rest. We are doing a gradual deloading of your training such that we are maintaining your fitness while allowing your body to recover from the work so that you show up on race day, hopefully, at your most fit and also well rested. Now, what a taper looks like is a little bit different for each athlete. That's going to vary a little bit based on your age, based on your training style. So generally, the older that you are, the more time it takes to recover. So while someone maybe in their teens or 20s can get away with a 7 to 10 day taper for a marathon, as you get older, you might need a little bit more time to get a quality taper in. Your training style is also going to really play a big role in that. Generally, the higher volume that you are training, the more taper time you need also, because again, you're really developing a heavy load of cumulative fatigue. The more training that you're taking on, the more fatigue that you're building, the more time it's going to take to recover from that fatigue and be able to show up as your most rested, most ready to go athlete. So it looks a little bit different depending on what you're training for, but a pretty typical taper is going to be somewhere in the 10 days to 2 weeks, even up to as much as 3 weeks. If you are training for a big event like a 100-mile, I've even done a gradual taper that lasts about 4 weeks because you're really building up to some hardy distances in something like that. So 2 weeks is kind of the general, but there's a lot of room for variation there depending on the individual. And this is where it's really valuable. On our last podcast, we talked about long-term coaching relationships. And I think this is a specific example of where that is so beneficial. The longer that you have been working with someone, the more times that you've gone through a training cycle and a taper cycle, the better you learn what it takes to get a particular athlete properly tapered and to the start line at their best. And sometimes that takes a little bit of trial and error that, maybe a 10-day taper was not quite enough for this athlete. Or some athletes really need a little bit more stimulus in their taper so that we're not just dialing everything back and really resting and recovering. But we need to put a little bit more stimulus. Maybe during race week, we do a mile or two at race pace to keep your legs fresh, to keep you feeling poppy, to keep you from feeling flat. So the specifics of a taper, really, it takes time to develop over time what is going to work best for you. And again, that might change over time and change for the event that you're training for also. Another common question that I get about tapering, specifically as it applies to race week, is should I strength train during race week? And I think this question really only applies to if you're already strength training, to be clear. So you should not be starting a new strength training program during your taper week. And we kind of laugh about that, but you're tapering down your running time. You've been used to being very highly active. It's not unusual for people to seek out new activities during their taper because they have less time. They're suddenly very energetic, which is a good thing, but we need to save that energy to put it toward race day. So if you are already in doing participating in a strength training program, this is part of your norm. Yes, you can strength train during race week, but it needs to be really dialed back. So for a lot of my athletes, I'll recommend maybe we're doing a body weight only workout, not loading it up with heavy weights, because we really don't want to be doing any muscle damage that you then have to recover from in addition to the recovery you're already trying to do. We don't want to add any additional fatigue. So body weight strength training, mobility movements are fantastic because you do, again, when you're running less, you might start to feel a little bit more stiff. You're spending more time sitting on the sofa, saving your energy. So yes, you can strength train during race week, but you need to keep it light. And I would also say if your race is on a Saturday, Wednesday is probably going to be your last workout. If your race is on a Sunday, maybe you can push that to Thursday. But the 2 days before your race are going to be the most important for rest. So 48 hours out from your actual race day, no more strength training. And that 48 and 24-hour window should be your most restful periods leading into a race. Sometimes even that 48-hour window is more important than the 24-hour window. Sometimes what you do 2 days before, you feel it on race day. It shows up on race day, more so than what you did even the day right before. So yeah, give yourself some time. If you are going to do strength, make sure you've also got space and time to make sure you're adequately recovered, fully recovered from any extra work that you've done that week. Okay, I think that covers the gist of what tapering is, what you can and can't do during that time. Probably the next biggest question that we get about race week is on carb loading. This is gets people every time. It does not need to be hard, but I think we tend to really get in our heads about it, and it's maybe there's a lot to think about. So, Michelle, tell us a little bit about carb loading. What is carb loading, and what's the point? Why do we do it?
Yeah, so carb loading, it's done. So I guess I'll start with you have carbs stored in your body as muscle glycogen, and you also have carbs that you eat. So our goal in carb loading is to increase your body stores of that glycogen that your body can use for fuel during your race during the few days before. So you want to just kind of stock up. You're like a squirrel storing away fuel, but for race day in your body. It's a pretty basic thing, but it kind of ties into tapering. As your body is consuming less fuel, you're trying to store it up. So you're not training as hard, which means you're not burning it up. And during your training cycle, you've depleted your stores. Day in and day out, you're doing hard training, long training. And even though you're eating carbohydrates during those runs and in between your runs, you're still not at max store. So carb loading tries to bring you back up to fully stocked or even a little bit overstocked so that your body has what it needs to fuel your race. Even in long distances and ultras and marathons, you're still using a lot of carbohydrate during those runs. They're endurance runs, they're a lot of aerobic. However, you're still burning a lot of carbohydrate versus fat. So our goal during carb loading is to increase the amount of carbohydrates you eat during the 2 to 3 days before your race. And there's some different varying ways you can do this. And again, it depends on you as a person and your ability to tolerate carbohydrates. I typically recommend going with the 3-day carb load because you can spread out that carbohydrate need over 3 days instead of 2. Some people can even go up to a week long. So, you have like days 4 to 7 out from your race. It's like a mini carb load. And then those last 3, you really kind of cram them in. So, your body can store about 90 minutes of fuel. And we've gone through this in a prior podcast where we talked about nutrition and running and how to take, how to test what you take on the run and how to increase your carbohydrates in your diet. But we're typically looking to eat about 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight per day in your carb load, if not more. So some people can tolerate more, and we try to find that little balance. leading up to race day. Um, and in those 1 to 3 days, you're going to you don't want to increase your caloric intake so much, but you back off your fat, you back off your protein temporarily. We tout lots of protein normally, but we back off just for a few days so you can get more carbohydrates in. And you're looking for low fat, low fiber sources. And again, this is very different than what we tell you in a normal diet where we say eat lots of fiber, eat lots of good fats, eat lots of protein. We're looking for very quick to absorb carbohydrates that your body can store. And examples of that are bread, pasta, apples, bananas, baked potatoes, sweet potatoes, cereal. And it's a lot. It's going to feel like a lot. You're going to consume these big portions of carbohydrates. Your body's going to feel bloated. It is going to get bloated, and that's actually a good thing. Because for every glycogen molecule your body stores, for every one part of that molecule, 20% of it is carbohydrate and 80% is water. So during your carbohydrate loading, you want to take in a lot of fluids, drink a lot, which you should be doing for your race anyway, add in some electrolytes, and that's going to help your body store those carbohydrates. And when they release them on race day, you're also getting the benefit of that water being released and used by your body. So it's kind of like a two-part benefit here. So, again, everyone's different. So you want to hit that 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight goal, but talk to your coach because, again, some people can tolerate up to 10 grams per kilogram a day and be fine. Other people hit that 5 and they really have a hard time consuming those carbohydrates. You kind of get, I get myself get it. It's, that last day you kind of feel you're puffy, you're not hungry, you're trying to force carbohydrates in, knowing you need them. But there's some tricks there that will help you get them in. You can drink your calories. I love to have juice as one of my carb loading kind of back pocket foods because you're drinking it and you're hydrating and getting the sugars in without feeling like you need to eat a lot of food. I think, one of the big things too that people panic about carb loading is that you're gaining weight and you are gaining weight. And you think you need to be thin and trim on race day and you still are. But like we said, that's water retention that you're holding with storing your carbohydrates. So I kind of recommend to everyone to put your scale away. Don't get on the scale in the last few days before your marathon or even the week before your marathon or half marathon or whatever you're training for. Hide it away, have someone lock it up. Don't get on your scale because that number will freak you out. As soon as you finish your run, that's going to be all gone. You're going to be using up those carbohydrates. You're going to use up that water and your weight's going to be completely back to normal. I think I feel like I just spit out a lot of information there. Yeah.
I think I have something to add when it comes to the bloat and the scale and that sort of thing. I think it's great advice to put the scale away because you will, when you are adequately, your glycogen stores are adequately full, as you said, you are retaining water. That's part of what stored glycogen is. It is part carbohydrate, part water leads to that stored source. You will see that on the scale. However, you shouldn't necessarily see it in the way that your clothes fit, the way that you look. If you do, that's a sign that you're getting excessive bloating, excessive water retention. And that often comes from overdoing it, which is certainly something that happens. Some people over carb load. It can also come from your properly carb loading, but your body is not adjusted to it. It doesn't know what you're doing because you haven't done it before. You haven't practiced it in your training. Maybe you've been under carbing during your training. And so here you're shocking your system with something it's not accustomed to. So by the time we get to race week, if you find that you're not responding well to your carb load and you feel bad, you feel like you are excessively bloated, your clothes are fitting more tightly. I think what you see in the mirror maybe isn't a good judgment because I think we all tend to, perceive ourselves differently than maybe what other people are seeing or what's actually there. But if you find that your clothes are fitting tight and you're really feeling excessively bloated, that's a sign that in your next training cycle, we need to revisit this and make sure that when you are actually in your heavy, hardy training, that you're getting enough carbohydrates then. So that your body is accustomed to absorbing, processing, and knowing what this is. When you get to race week, ideally, you're not eating in a way that is completely weird and strange and foreign to your body. We are eating mostly normally along the way, but we're tapering down the amount of load that you're doing. So if you can maintain a pretty normal diet while decreasing the training load and decreasing your activity throughout the week, you're naturally and comfortably going to be storing more carbohydrate. So if you have tried the carb load before and know that it makes you feel like crud, try that method instead. Eat normally, eat the way that you would eat in a normal training week. But because we're cutting down the amount of exercise that you're doing, you're storing more of that energy. It's not getting used and burned in 5, 6, 7 workouts during that week. And know that that's a good thing to come back and revisit if you do find yourself in that situation that the carb load feels bad. It shouldn't feel bad. You shouldn't feel like you're force feeding yourself. If you do, we need to make some adjustments and talk to a coach, talk to a nutrition coach, talk to a registered dietitian, and see what we can troubleshoot there. Again, I really want to highlight, you shouldn't feel bad. You shouldn't show up on the start line feeling bleh. That's the best way I can explain it. Like you said, on the scale, it is normal to see a slight difference, but you shouldn't feel a big change in the way that your clothes fit and the way that you feel.
Right. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we also emphasize during our training with our own athletes practice, like you said, we practice it during training, but even practicing mini carb loads before a
Mhm.
hard workout day, before a long run, like the night before, maybe add an extra sweet potato to your plate or add, again, it's nothing new. We don't, as Lauren said, don't try anything new. Every food that you put in, everything I listed on that mini list of, good foods should be something that was already part of your diet. Testing anything new on race day is a terrible idea. And it's also terrible the week before because you just don't know how your body's going to react. And again, don't start cramming in gels either. Use the same gels you've used at the same intervals you've practiced with. We don't want to get in there and then overcarb because you can still get muscle cramping and all these terrible side effects of that as well.
That's a great point. I don't think we specifically said that in the beginning of nothing new, only tried and true. Make sure if you haven't practiced this, that you're not putting in, a whole bunch of prunes or something like that the day before the race to try to get your carbs up. And again, that's something that if you get to race week and you haven't done it, bookmark that for next time, that this is something that you should be doing every week. Your long run is like a dress rehearsal every week. You have the opportunity to practice what you're going to eat for dinner the night before, what you're going to eat for breakfast the morning of, how you're fueling on the run. Every single long run that you have is an opportunity to practice. So by the time you get to race week, you've had 10, 12, 14, 16 opportunities to practice this, figure out what does and doesn't work, and dial into that. And I think, again, coming back real quick, you touched on it, and then I've wanted to emphasize it, that looking for carbohydrate sources that are low in fat during the week of your race, or the night before your long run in training, is key. That's another, when people feel really bad from their carb load, that's another way that it goes wrong, is they are something like a donut that is fried versus something like a bagel that is not, it's boiled or baked or however you're picking them. That makes a huge difference. So make sure when you're looking for your carbohydrate sources that they are low in fat, and you're not seeking out high fat sources that are going to, again, really add to the bloat and really add to the gut issues that you could experience from it too. So low fat, high processed stuff is your way to go for carb loading, even though that's not necessarily what we recommend as a lifestyle choice. Okay. So next, okay, we've done the taper, we've done the carb loading throughout the week, the several days leading up to it. Let's talk about like the actual race itself and preparing for the running portion of the race. That's obviously a huge part of it. Is it important to, Scott, I'm going to ask you this question. Is it important to go into a goal race with a pre-made strategy, race plan? Like, what should we be thinking about in terms of running our race before we actually get into it?
Yeah, it's absolutely important and necessary to come in with a plan. Now, how specific that plan, right, is going to be predicated on your race. So, but in general terms, yes, having a plan and having it laid out and ready to go is key. I think you said it, you both said it a couple of times. Practicing, what you're about to do is key throughout your training. So I'm always big, and I always emphasize, don't try anything new on race day. Don't try anything new the week before the race. Don't try anything new during taper time. So use the fuel, the gels, the electrolytes that you're comfortable with, that you've been using in your training. Um, but with that, right? So that's great in theory, but is it going to be available to you, and you're going to have that on race day? So that's where it comes into preparation and planning. Is you want to make sure the week leading up to the race you have everything that you need, right? So if you are used to using a certain type of gel, certain type of hydration and electrolyte, making sure you have them, right? You don't want to get to Friday, races on Saturday, and you have to put in an order to get your electrolytes. You want to have those things ready. So I'm always big on just a week in advance, and maybe even a little bit earlier than that, just writing down what are you going to need for race day, right? And then using that week to get ready. Your shoes, as simple as that. Your shoes and your gear. What is your favorite shoes? What is your favorite gear, right? That you've practiced with, having those ready to go. So those are all, I think, high level things of just having them ready to go as part of your plan. When it comes to the actual running portion of it, I think you do need to take a look at what is the race course like. Is this going to be a hilly course? Is this going to be a flat course? Is this going to be a trail? Is this going to be a road? I think all of that really is going to play into some of the very finite details, but I think you've got to prepare for that, right? So again, looking into your training, if it's going to be a hilly race, for example, leaning into how you performed and what you did in training on your hill days or whenever you were practicing those type of things. Um, so as much as you can be prepared in that way is great, but also there's going to be some things that are going to pop up that are out of your control. And I've mentioned before some of these environmental things that may pop up, the weather, right? You may not have any control of that, but maybe just from a race planning perspective, understanding that, hey, the weather may change. Is it going to be in the fall or in the spring when the weather may shift, dramatically and on a dime? Making sure you pack and have laid out maybe a windbreaker, maybe an extra layer or two, maybe some extra socks, an extra hat, right? And all of that is up to your comfort level. If you're somebody, I'm this way, is I hate being wet. So I have multiple shirts, multiple socks, multiple hats, right? That's a comfort thing. So knowing yourself and what your strengths are and having those things ready to go, I think is key. Um, and then I think too, if we're talking about just the running itself, your pacing, right, and how you're going to execute your day, that's critical of having a plan. Work with your coach on specifically, based on your race, if it's all the way from a 5K up to a long ultra marathon, what does that pacing look like? I think in, pretty much straightforward terms, we can say is, you want a consistent pace. And in the shorter of a race, right, you want to be aiming for, um, sometimes you hear negative splits or finishing strong, right? You don't want to go out way too fast and then die in the last mile or so, right? So for shorter races, maybe starting out a little bit more conservatively, right? And again, that goes back to your training. You probably been practicing some of these tactics from a pacing perspective, so you can finish strong, right? So you can finish fast. If you're looking at a much longer event, right, all the way up to, let's say, an ultra marathon that could be hours long, even up to a day long, the reality is you may not, you probably won't negative split and finish your last 10 miles faster than your first 10 miles. So then it really just comes down to a lot more strategy, right? How do you even out your pacing? How do you temper yourself in the beginning, kind of keep yourself calm throughout the day? There's a lot of things that are going to play into that as well, right? And those are some of the things in your control. Michelle talked about nutrition, hydration. Those are things that you're going to have to want to also spell out in your plan of attack, right? That'll help you maintain your pace throughout the day if we're talking about an ultra specifically. But with ultras, for example, it's really about just moving forward, right? So the pace may slow down somewhat considerably at the end, but trying to minimize how much slower you're slowing down, right? And so those are things that you want to look into from a planning perspective. So I think all of that kind of really comes down to, some of the things like the gear, um, your fuel, your nutrition, things that you can tangibly take, have ready to go as part of your plan. And then some of those things like we talked about, the pacing and how are you going to execute things, more mental, and how are you going to have physically how to execute on that. So I think that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of a very high level, how I would wrap together a plan and a strategy.
I think to come back to pacing a little bit, I think something that applies to every distance, every athlete is the importance of starting conservatively and trusting yourself. And trusting that that is the approach to take. One of the most common phrases in marathoning specifically is you can't win the race in the first 5K, but you sure as heck can lose it. Um, and that's something that people really struggle with, because here, we talked about the taper, we talked about the carb load. You're standing on the start line like freaking ready to go,
Hmm.
and you're surrounded by people who are there to race. Like, the energy is high, in addition to just the way that you feel, and it's very easy to start too fast, and feel good there. That's another key, is that you start too fast and it feels good, so you roll with it until it doesn't. And this is where we get into trouble. So one of the things I really like to tell people is, especially in a distance event, the first mile is probably going to be too fast. That's okay. The key is that you use mile 2 to dial it in, to pull it back and find your pace. Um, I feel like it's too much maybe to put on a
Hmm.
person or to put on yourself, that first mile needs to be at X pace. There's a lot that goes into that. Start lines can be crowded. If you're at like a huge event, you might be too slow, or way behind your pace because of the crowds that you're surrounded by. Or again, you take off way too hot because you're excited, and the energy and the all that goes into the start line. So give yourself some grace there in that first mile, but mile 2, you need to dial into the pace range that you're targeting. So resist that urge. If you find yourself moving faster than you had planned and it feels good, pull it back anyway. You're supposed to feel good in the first 5K, the first few miles of a distance event. So that doesn't mean push harder. Pull back to the pace that you are comfortable with, familiar with, that you have trained at. Don't let yourself roll with it and get yourself into a tough spot by mile 18, mile 19, mile 20. That's where you see the uh, consequence of
Hmm.
the first few miles. But touching on that a little bit, should you warm up before a distance event specifically? Let's say, I think for a lot of people, probably a 5K, 10K distance, we know a warm up is probably appropriate. But when we're talking about longer miles, a half marathon, a marathon, an ultra marathon, should you warm up beforehand?
Yes. Yeah, I think you should warm up no matter what the distance of the event, even if you're going to be running for 24 hours. I think going to the line and the gun goes off and you're cold as ice, I think is not a good thing whatsoever. I look at warming up, and this is what I advise. Is I think it's more than just what some people might think is going out and running or jogging, let's say a mile or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I think we see or hear a lot, maybe in shorter distances. Okay, go out and do a warm up of 1 mile, right? Slow. I think it really just comes down to getting your muscles loose and heated up and your body itself ready to go. That could be some stretching, that could just be some skip, some strides, in the parking lot or right before the gun goes off. Anything to get your body warm and moving is going to be beneficial. Now, obviously, the shorter the distance may be a little bit different in terms of how dynamic and how those kind of warm up things look. But I think yes, absolutely, it's beneficial to keep your body warm, ready to go. There's a host of reasons for that. I think one, it just you feel better, it gets your body warm and going. It can avoid, muscle injuries. It can avoid, going like you said, going out too strong. Maybe that'll help temper it, right? As if you're getting a good warm up in, you're not just going to blaze out of the gun super fast. You might, but to answer your question, I think yes. I think there's a host of reasons why it's important to warm up no matter what the event distance.
I think I agree with that too. And I really like your point of that warm up maybe looks different, depending on what you're training for. So, or what you're racing. So someone lining up at the start line of a 100 mile, I would pretty much never have them do a 1 mile warm up before they start their 100 mile race. You should be starting your race
Mhm.
at warm up effort. But to what you said about making sure that your muscles are loose and ready to go, you're not standing there tight and shivering on the start line. So maybe you've kind of walked around the start line a little bit. Maybe you've done a few stretches. Whereas then in a road race, where we're really going for a specific pace, a specific time goal, that's where a running warm up probably has more of a benefit to you. Yeah, that's a great answer. So, all right, here is a really common. Well, actually, you know what? Before we get to this question, we'll come back to it. I want to touch back on hydration and fueling going into a race. Should you, when we're looking at hydration, I think it's pretty common knowledge that for your race fueling, for the calories, the nutrition you're taking in, you need to have that in your pockets. They make shorts with pockets. They make sports bras with pockets. You need to be carrying the calories that you need to take in for a short race, for a marathon or less. For an ultra marathon, you might have crew or aid station access along the way that you can pick up some of those things. You don't need to start mile 1 with everything you need for the entire day necessarily. But what about hydration? Should we be carrying our own hydration? Should we be using aid stations? How does the planning and the strategy apply to that?
Yeah, I think yes and yes, but I think there's a caveat to the latter. So I think yes, you should be carrying your hydration, right? So again, going back to what you've used in your training and your practice, your electrolytes, getting it in continually. But I think there's a point to be made to doing some research on the race and what the aid stations are going to have, right? So a lot of the races will have websites that will actually tell you, hey, there's going to be goo-roctane at every aid station. Fantastic. If you somebody that have used goo-roctane, great. That's a preparation. But what if it's not there when you get there? What if it's all used up, et cetera, et cetera. So be prepared to carry your hydration, but also know that there might be something there that you can utilize. Another I think key point to point out is depending on how long the event is. Let's say it's a very long ultra, or even a short ultra for that matter. Can you physically carry that much hydration? Sometimes the answer is no. So I think maybe a trick to that is whatever electrolyte you use, right? Fill in the blank. Maybe keeping those in baggies, right, and utilizing the aid station's water and then mixing it there. So that's an example of where you may not necessarily be using the food or the type of gel that they have at that aid station, but you can utilize and take advantage of what they offer from water, right? And use what you're carrying, because those powders that you carry in a bag, you're going to be super light and not weigh as much as the water if you're mixing it all and carrying it all together. So that's an example of where you can kind of, have both at your disposal.
I think that's good. I mean, there's been also, I'm sorry,
Yep.
but like I've gone to races where I've studied the aid station locations, where they're going to be, what they're going to have, and they've had like a volunteer shortage.
Hmm.
So there wasn't an aid station at all at mile 6. And so they moved that one to mile 8, and then another one, so the whole
Hmm.
strategy for anyone using the aid stations has been thrown off.
Yeah.
So since that experience, I always have people bring something with them, because there's that
Yeah.
chance, that it doesn't
Yeah.
that the race doesn't go according to plan.
So, Michelle, let's coming to a road runner perspective then, because let's be honest, in a road race, you are not going to carry baggies of extra electrolytes, and you're not going to take the time to stop at the aid station and unscrew your bottle and refill. And we have time to do that in an ultra race, but that's not going to happen in a road race for probably most people. So, in a road race, what would you recommend? How would you recommend that people address that or prepare for that?
Yeah, I've just personally, I train with my fuel, I train with my hydration pack, and I carry my fuel with me. I just choose personally not to rely on aid stations, or if I know that I can't carry that much that much hydration with me, then I'm like, okay, I know that I can make it from this point to this point. I'll grab some fluid somewhere between these 2 mile markers, knowing that, okay, that'll save some of my own carried hydration to last me to the end. I just make sure to get a strategy of what ifs before, and train that way in my long runs, to say, like, I'm going to be slightly dehydrated. I'm going to train a little dehydrated so that I know what happens on race day if an aid station's not there, or I've gone through my own hydration a little bit fast. which has also happened when the weather is a little bit hotter than usual and I'm drinking faster than I expected. And in Salisbury, like that was a little warmer and ickier. I had my hydration pack and knew going into that race, I didn't want to carry it the whole way because it didn't feel good. So I ditched it at mile 13 and knew that was my strategy, that I'm going to just risk it and rely on the aid stations that thankfully were where they said they were going to be.
I'd also add, and I mean that really gets me thinking in terms of like from a strategy perspective, where you can save a lot of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some athletes may think that you have to stop at the aid station, even if you don't need it, you have to do it, right? No, you don't have to do it. If it's in a shorter
Right.
race, why stop? If you're carrying your fluids, if you're carrying your fuel, that's wasted time if you're stopping at an aid station. Conversely, let's talk about an ultra, right? You could use it to your benefit, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you could have a plan of how are you going to attack each particular aid station. Forget about what they have at that aid station. Just going into your race day plan of knowing, am I going to stop at this aid station? And if I am, for how long? I think too many times, athletes stop at an aid station and say, okay, I'm going to fill up this bottle with powder, and ooh, they have, cake or a cookie here. I'm going to nibble on that. Before you know it, you've been standing there for 5 minutes, and not only are you wasting time, your body's cooling down. So I think, and not to get too far deep into this topic, but I think just having a strategy of how you're going to attack the aid stations. Are you going to stop for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds? Or are you going to walk through the aid stations, grab your
Mm-hmm.
stuff, go while you're moving? I think there's something to be said for having a strategy around that, especially the longer the event goes in distance and hours. 15 aid stations times 5 minutes apiece, that's a lot of wasted time.
Yeah, and I did. I mean, knowing with my strategy for Salisbury, like knowing 13 miles, I'm chucking that hydration pack. I had many long runs scheduled where I would loop to my house saying, okay, I'm going to get water 3 miles, the next 3 miles. So mile 16, I'm going to loop by my house, take the fuel they have, looking up that they had Gatorade Endurance, taking that fuel on my long run and then circling another 3 miles. So looking ahead of time at how spaced they were, and
Mm-hmm.
it's boring as it gets, just making a bunch of little circles back to my
Yeah.
front porch and treating it like an aid station. Like, this is how we're going to handle this.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked.
So I think that's a great point that you both made. I think to touch back to Scott for a second, I think it is really good advice in an ultra specifically. When you get to an aid station, plan to continue moving through it. You can work through an aid station and pick things up off the table while you continue to move. You don't have to dead stop your feet. You can even, if you do have to dead stop your feet for something like filling up a water bottle, you can fill up your water bottle and then keep walking while you find your pack of electrolytes in the back of your pack, while you dump the electrolytes in there. You can continue moving while you do that, and that's saving you so much time. If
Mm-hmm.
you're picking up something to eat, you can eat while you walk. You do not need to stop, eat, and then go. So keeping that in mind for those kinds of aid stations in a long distance event. Michelle, I think you touched on a really great point in practicing in a faster, higher intensity situation, practicing what it would be like to use the aid station. When you grab a cup off the table, it is a skill, a real skill. And I'm going to admit I don't have it, to be able to drink out of an aid station cup while you are running, let alone running at pace, and actually get that into your mouth and all the way down into your stomach. That's
I don't
part
have
of
that
it.
either.
No, I have to either drastically slow down or I need to walk. And I won't even lie. Sometimes when I walk, it's hard to get it done. So
Yeah.
I might need
Yeah.
to stop, swallow, and then go. Um, so you need to keep that in mind. If you are going to rely on aid stations, how well can you depend on yourself to do that and actually get hydration? The other thing to think about with that strategy is you don't know what kind of cup they're going to have. So if they have a paper cup that you can pinch, and that's the strategy, take the cup and pinch it so that you're kind of making like a nozzle to get it down. But let's say they have styrofoam cups. You go to pinch it and that cup breaks and there goes your fluid. You're done. You're covered in Gatorade instead of getting it down. Then you're stuck. You're going to have to stop to get some hydration in. Then you don't know how they're mixing what's on the course. So you might know the product that they have, but you've got to trust Joe Volunteer that he mixed it correctly. It's very common that these come when you're purchasing for a race, you're purchasing in bulk. It comes as a concentration and it needs to be mixed. So you've got to trust that they did that correctly. It's not over diluted or over concentrated when you take it in. And on top of that, you don't know how much is going to be in the cup. Are they going to give you this much in the bottom, or are they giving you a full cup of whatever it is? So just, I think, especially when it comes to racing, a lot of people want to go as light as they can, especially if we're going for a time goal. And I think I get that. And I think that that's a smart strategy, but as light as you can still means you need to carry your own hydration. I think carrying a bottle, at least one bottle, is your best practice. And like Michelle said, if you plan to continue to take sips off that bottle or off your pack for the first however long that bottle can last you, and then switch to aid stations, you're doing yourself so much better. You're giving yourself that really strong half marathon or however much you can get off of the bottle that you're carrying before you need to use aid stations. Or you might find that bottle can carry you all the way through up to 3 or 4 miles before the finish, and you can get there and you're okay. But I think the best practice is to always at least start with your own hydration. Don't plan to go completely hands-free, completely nothing, and rely solely on aid stations. I think you will find more often than not, you shoot yourself in the foot. Okay, talking about hydration, this is the other topic that we were about to get into. I get this question all the time. Let's start with start at the start line, getting ready for your race. Go into the bathroom. This is such a important topic to talk about, and it's weird and it's uncomfortable, but I bet everyone listening has this question and maybe has been afraid to ask it or embarrassed or whatever. So bathroom strategies on race morning. Let's talk about that first. How can we make sure that we are on the start line ready to go?
Yeah. Go when you got to go.
Not ready to go. Not ready to go. Ready to race, having already taken care of business.
Go when you got to go. Yeah. Go early and often. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think everybody that's raced at least a couple of times has been stuck in a porta potty line before the race, and they're looking down going, "Oh shoot, I'm gonna miss the start because I really got to go." Right. I don't know. Go early and often. I mean, typically there's going to be porta potties out there. I think there's only so much you can do in terms of prep for that, in terms of knowing exactly where they're going to be. Some races you have no idea where they're going to be. So yeah, I think my contribution to this topic is going to be going early and often.
I think, well, to that point, I think making sure that you are planning extra time, that you are arriving to the start line with enough time to wait in that long porta potty line. And the more participants that you have in a race, the longer that line is going to be. Even though, they're supposed to have X number of porta potties for X number of people, just the rule of thumb is it's going to be a long line, and the line's going to be longer if the race is bigger, even if they've got 1,000,010 porta potties.
Yeah. I swear I'm not trying to dodge this topic, but it kind of goes into like, do you know the parking of race day, right? Where are you going to park? Is somebody going to drop you off? Does your hotel room have a coffee maker? Do you have to stop at a Starbucks? Is the Starbucks even open that early? I mean, all of those things I think play into what we're talking about of the potty break. Yeah, so I think kind of knowing that in advance can kind of help out too. Yeah, if you show up late and every parking spot is taken, you're probably going to be worrying about parking and not going to the bathroom. So get there early.
Yes, I know this is like kind of related to pee, but the New York Half Marathon, it's like a huge race, and they were very well organized, but it was so bitter cold that morning. And I know I am a nervous peer. I will pee 18 times before every race just because that's just what I do. And so I got there super early, found the 8 million porta pots, hung out near there until the start. But people were going in because it was so cold. People were going in the porta pots to stay warm. So just to warm up for a few minutes. So that was a huge, I don't know, it was a backlog. So I just want to give you that warning. Like cold races, I did not know this until that happened, that people would go purposely into the gross porta pots to get out of the wind and cold. So if it's a cold race, I just maybe give yourself extra time to pee. That's all. Random thought.
People don't want to talk about this, but everybody is thinking about it, is the race morning poop. Every runner wants to get to that start line having already taken care of business. I think the biggest tip that I can give people here, because I feel like I get this question all the time, is how do I make sure I'm getting to the start line and I've already gotten that out of the way? The biggest piece of advice I can give is routine. That is your key, is having a daily routine. And again, practicing this in your long runs, but also like every day during the week. The more routine your day is, your like, when you eat dinner, when you go to bed, when you wake up, what your morning routines are, when you have coffee, that teaches your body to be routine. So when you get to race morning, it's going to be no different. You've got that same routine that you wake up, you have your coffee, and you get that business out of the way. The less routine that you are in your daily life, the less reliable that's going to be for you on race day. So that's good advice, I think, for being a healthy person in general. But that if you're looking at race day, if this is a routine problem for you, that's what you need to look at, is your daily routines. There's nothing that you can do on race day that is going to fix that for you, aside from like medicinal assistance that is going to put you into a bad place in your race. So, we don't want to be taking stuff to make you go, or taking stuff to not make you go, if we can prevent that, aside from having a medical issue that you need those kind of products for. So establish a routine for yourself. Coffee is fantastic. That helps in that department. But again, making that a routine so that it's not something you're just trying to implement to get through the process on race day. To that end, I want to make sure too that we address periods. When you have your period on race day, I think this is something worth talking about. And when we're talking about being prepared for a race, that's an important one. Making sure, if you're looking at the calendar and you know that you're going to be on your period during the race, make sure that you have products that you can trust, that if you're traveling, that you've packed them, or if you're just driving to the race, that you have everything you need with you. Having products you can trust is key, because I know we're all thinking, you don't want to have to stop during the race, and you don't want to have leakage or anything like that during the race. So making sure that you have, just like with everything else, that you have practiced using products on the run that you are comfortable with. Reach out to your coach. If you are a female and you need a female opinion, reach out to your coach about products that we have used or that work well for us. We're not embarrassed to talk about that kind of stuff. And I think it's important to share that kind of stuff as female athletes too. The way that we prepare for this might be a little bit different than the way a non-active or a non-athlete person prepares for it. And to that end, I also think, again, a lot of the advice we're giving here is you've practiced it. It's a routine. You've done this before. And so I do think it's important when you're training. It's not pleasant to train through your period, or maybe even like your premenstrual period is sort of the worst part, honestly. I do think it's important to train through this. There are always cases that we need to make adaptations. But you might get to race day and it's that time of the month. So making sure that in your training, we're training through it, only making adaptations where we need to, not necessarily structuring all of your training specifically around your cycle. Again, nothing new, only tried and true. Practice training through it, practice running through it, practice the products that you need that will be reliable for you. Okay. Then we have the expo. The expo for a big race is usually a big ordeal. For a small race, it might just be a little thing. But let's talk about Michelle for the expo. Do you have any great tips of things we should definitely do, definitely enjoy, and things we should definitely not do?
Oh, yes. So I I would say the first order of business when you get to these expos, and they are so cool. The bigger the race, the bigger the expo, and they're so much fun, and there's so much going on if you've never been to one. It's really cool. It's part of the race experience, and if you're able to go, you should go. I think the first thing you need to do is take care of getting your race packet if you're picking it up there, getting all your swag, and then immediately secure that in a backpack or a purse that has a zipper or something, because you risk, these expos have so many tables, they have so many different people speaking, there's so much excitement that it's very easy to leave it on a table or put it down for a second when you're buying a new pair of sunglasses and walk away. And then what are you going to do for your race that you've just spent months training for? So definitely secure that immediately somewhere where you're not going to drop it or leave it while you're wandering around, or if you're traveling in a new city, you're not going to accidentally leave it somewhere else. And a lot of these expos, especially the major ones, will have course experts and coaches or veteran runners on site who will give race strategy. I know New York did it like every 2 hours. They had a 15-minute talk, and it was very cool. So you could plan to be there at that time and listen to people who have run the race 20 times. And the race director was there, and there were coaches that specifically coached for this race that gave very cool and detailed strategy that you could use. Like, when you get to this part, you're going to have this hill for 5 minutes, back off your pace, and then gun it because you have nothing coming for the next 2 miles. Here's how to handle the bridge. Here's how to handle this part of the trail. It's people who know what they're doing. So it's very valuable advice. And they'll even give you advice on the weather. So how to handle it in the weather, because now you're 24 hours out and you know what that weather is likely going to be. And then take some time, like definitely walk through, check out all the vendors. There's lots of cool things there. A lot of times there's newer companies that are up and coming and have some innovative things you can try, or, new foods or recovery gear, lots of clothing going on. So you can get discounts on shoes and everything, but don't try anything new at the expo. I can't stress this. We keep saying, don't try anything new on race day. That includes the expo. There's usually samples being handed out of this cool pre-race thing or this new electrolyte drink. Don't drink them. If you want it, buy a little sample to take home and try it after the race. Don't eat anything at the expo unless it's something you've already put in your mouth, you've already practiced with, you know what it's going to do to your body. That includes gels, drinks, anything. And it also includes, a lot of times they have cool recovery gadgets. Do not put them on your body. You don't know what's going to happen. It could be great. It could help you. It could cramp up a muscle that's going to have a spasm until race warning. So look at all the cool stuff. Take your time going through, pick up some swag. Don't try anything. And then just enjoy yourself. Take a few moments to soak those moments in, because this is what you've worked for. This is part of the race. This is why you're here. They're really exciting. Expos are so much fun, and they get your adrenaline pumping and the excitement for the next day. So I think you should just definitely enjoy it. Especially if you're traveling, try to stay off your feet. It's really easy to get caught up in touring, sightseeing, and playing at the expo. But make sure you're recovering. We tapered. You don't want to undo your taper in the last 24 hours.
I think that last bit of advice is key too, that if this is your goal race, especially if you are traveling for it, plan your sightseeing for after the race if you can. Save your legs beforehand. If it's not your goal race, if you are traveling to have that experience, to see that city, go for it. You might be tired. You might have sore feet when you stand on the start line, and that's, part of the trade-off. That's okay. But if this is your goal race, be cognizant of how much time you're spending on your feet. Try to save that 5-star restaurant you've been wanting to try, make that your reward after the race, and try to plan your sightseeing and your travel for afterward as opposed to prior. I know sometimes that's harder with races are often on Sunday and then the weekend is over. But when that works for you, plan ahead that you stay off your feet a little bit. I have to, because it's the fall right now. We have the World Marathon Majors coming up, the U.S. Majors. And even aside from those, most big city marathons, especially if they have a Nike tent, they have the Kipchoge treadmill. That's it's a giant treadmill, and it's a challenge to see how long you can hold world record pace. And, for most people, it's not very long. It's a very fast pace. If this is your goal race and this is the race you have spent 4, 5, 6 months training for, don't try the world record pace treadmill that you see. It's so fun to watch people. But when you watch people, you will see that they are like maximizing their stride. I mean, the amount of energy that you spend in the maybe 15, 30 seconds that you're able to keep up with it is not like a huge energy expenditure. But you will see people that are maxing out their stride. Maybe they're going to pull something. They fall off the treadmill all the time because suddenly you just can't keep your feet underneath you anymore. So along the lines of, not trying any new gadgets, not trying any new foods, don't try new paces either when you see that big tempting treadmill up there. Just words of wisdom from your coach. I know it's tempting, but okay, the last topic that we have to address is nerves, race anxiety. I think taper crazies are a part of that you're tapering down your workload and we're getting close to race day. You suddenly have a lot more free time and a lot more energy. That's what we refer to as the taper crazies, is you're sort of in the week leading up to the race. But then you also, race nerves are a part of that. And I think that tends to kind of set in as we get closer and closer to the race. Maybe we're to race weekend now. So let's talk about that. Just, how do you handle it, either for yourself as an athlete or a coach, when you have race anxiety, or the taper crazies, leading up to? Michelle, why don't I throw to you first? How do you handle race nerves heading into a big event, an important event?
A lot of times I contact you because you're my coach and blow up your texts. I mean, I definitely get bad taper crazies. We've talked about this in another episode, but I do try to channel my energy elsewhere. I think that's been a big help for me. And, I can't get on my Peloton because we're tapering. I can't go out for a lot of runs because, again, we're tapering. So I am a high energy person, especially when I'm anxious. So this past taper time, I went out in the garden. I gardened for hours. It was the only time my garden has ever looked good, ever. Nothing heavy, no heavy duty lifting or anything, just kind of weeding and getting out and planting some stuff. Yoga, because it's keeping me active and mobile and working on mobility, nothing more than body weight, keeping me focused on my breathing. And then I just make sure my sleep and nutrition are on point because that's all I can control. And if that's out of whack, I'm going to be out of whack. But I think having the support system of other runners, I have friends that I would group text on and we would all kind of get our little taper crazy text out of the way. It's the support system and just finding alternative low impact activities just keeps me busy. I think keeping myself busy during those 2 weeks is the most important thing.
Scott, how about you? How do you handle your race anxiety or taper crazies leading up to an event, a big event?
Similar to Michelle. I've been racing and doing events far, far too long to think that I still should be getting taper crazies, but I do. It's normal. And sometimes I feel it's not necessarily my brain or an athlete's brain worrying about the race. I think it's your body's sign to tell you it's time to race. It's coming down from high volume, the load, the taper, right? So it's a lot of it is just the physical that's coming out. But I think the things that I can control, the things that I do, and what I recommend doing at a very high level is keeping my mind off of it. I got a lot more time. An athlete should have a lot more time sleeping in a little bit more. I run in the mornings, so it gives me an extra hour of sleep sometimes. Maybe that's the week that I catch up on a movie that I have been wanting to see. Just get my mind off of it. I think that's probably the best. Some athletes like myself really obsess and think a lot, about the race that's coming up and trying to manage every little aspect. But the reality is we can't manage every little aspect. And so keeping your mind off of it is probably very key. And something that I recommend to athletes is just do something other than running to get your brain and mind off of it. Read a book, get your mind going somewhere else. That would be my recommendation. In addition to everything Michelle said is exactly what I do too, but I think that's maybe some tips to mentally get yourself separated, and maybe that'll help.
I think I want to circle back real quick to, we kind of laugh about it, but a point that Michelle made is lean on your coach. That a lot, especially in that week leading up to, it is very common to have little niggles or things that pop up. Like, am I nursing an injury? Do I have this thing coming on? It's also really common to feel like you're on the verge of getting sick. Sometimes you do actually get sick. That's actually more common than you might think when your body is coming down off of this massive training cycle. Sometimes it's that you feel you're on the verge of getting sick and you never actually do. A lot of times that is stress, more commonly. But don't be afraid to lean on your coach. I know that you are probably feeling anxious and like you're being needy, is a term that I hear a lot. But it's important to have that, even if it's not a coach, if it's a friend, if it's a spouse, to have someone outside of your head to help you sort through what is real and what is not, and kind of help you manage those anxieties. If you have a little thing in your calf, we want to talk about that, because maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something in your head, but maybe it's something we need to address. And same for, just having someone that can be that calming presence for you. Of, you probably just need to make sure you're getting a lot of water, make sure you're getting your electrolytes, make sure you're getting your good sleep. A lot of times these are things that we know, and for whatever reason, we need someone to remind us and be that centering person. Um, for myself, when I have a big race that's important to me, the race anxiety, it comes, I think, from a pressure to perform, that, I've spent all this time training. I have a very specific result that I desire, that I want to reach. And I think that that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. And so I think taking the time to sit with your feelings and address, why do I feel so anxious? Is it because, yes, this is important to me, and I think that's okay, that this is an important event, you care about it, you've prepared for it. But a lot of times it's that self pressure of, this is the result that I am chasing, this is the acceptable outcome. And sitting with that for a minute and making sure that you take the time to think through, what happens if that I don't get that result? What happens if I get to mile 10 and I can't hold it anymore? What happens if my shoe comes untied and the pack gets away from me? Like, I think it is healthy to think through some of the what ifs from the perspective of, how am I going to handle this if it happens? So inevitably, when you don't have a perfect race, which is like a once in a lifetime experience, if ever, you've kind of worked through in your head how to handle it. That when you face an obstacle, when you face a challenge, it doesn't mean your race is over. It doesn't mean that you have to slow down and just drop off of whatever the A goal was. You have a plan for what you're going to do next, how you're going to work through that obstacle and that challenge, because you've already thought ahead to it. And I think the other, it's sort of along the same lines. The other recommendation I have is to develop a mantra for yourself, either in the race itself and or leading up to the race. Two of my favorites that are kind of along the same line of, chasing a very particular outcome, that, is probably less likely to happen, when you've got one specific outcome that defines success for you. um, you need to broaden your definition of success to make sure that you're happy with the way that you race. That so one of the mantras that I have is, stay in the fight. When it gets hard, when you have an obstacle, stay in the fight. Be proud of the way that you race, and race in a way that makes you feel proud. Not just that the result is the thing you're going to be proud of, that the result is what you need to get. Be proud of the way that you do it and the way that you get there. And so stay in the fight is something that helps me stay in it, stay in the race, even if it's not going the way I want it to. Stay where you are. Don't quit. Don't give up. Don't, Hope is not lost. Stay in it. Be proud of the way that you're doing it. The other question I ask myself when things get hard in the race, or even on the start line, like, maybe that like hour before the race when you're really starting to get excited, but also anxious, nervous about what's about to happen. I ask myself, how do you want to feel tonight? Depending on what the distance is, if it's a marathon, I might ask myself, how do I want to feel by lunchtime? Because this thing is going to be over by lunchtime, and life is going to move on. So just reminding myself of that there's an end point and time is going to flow anyway, regardless of if it goes well, if it goes poorly, if I win, if I lose, time passes anyway, and it's going to be over eventually. Or again, tonight, if it's an ultra, or tomorrow, if it's a really long ultra. How do you want to feel about this when it's over, when it's done? And that actually helps me in the race to determine if what I'm feeling is a feeling or if what I'm feeling is real. Like, we're talking about doing hard things. And I think it's very natural and normal to question when you are in the midst of doing something that's really hard for you, to have those thoughts of, can I keep going? Should I quit? Should I drop out? Should I slow down? Should I back off? Like, it's really hard. And so asking yourself how you want to feel about this at the end of the day can kind of help you sort through, okay, is this just hard and I need to stick with it and just keep working hard and accept that it's going to be hard? Or do I have a real problem that, I need to address, stop, that sort of thing. And to be clear, those are reasonable outcomes. That sometimes you need to stop. Sometimes you are hurt. Sometimes that you are sick. Sometimes something is really wrong, and stopping is an acceptable outcome. But it can be tricky in the moment to make that decision for yourself of, is this a legitimate issue or is this a feeling? And I think that helps. How do you want to feel at the end of the day about what you did, is helpful for me. So,
I love that.
Is there anything else that you guys would add to, any of this race week prep in general? It doesn't necessarily need to be race nerves, taper crazies.
The only thing I thought of, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. I was just gonna say the mantra is a good way to put the icing on the cake.
Yeah. I learned this with travel races. Carry on, if you're traveling, carry on your race gear with you. Luggage gets lost so frequently or delayed. Even if you're on a train or whatever, have that with you. Check it, make sure it fits the carry-on. But keep that with you. And if for some reason, I don't know why you wouldn't be able to carry it, take 2 pairs of shoes. Keep one with you, one in the bag. Just things can go wrong. Carry extra shoelaces because you're going to be out of your element and you just don't know where a running store is going to be to replace something. Carry 2 sets of everything and don't check your running gear. That was just something that popped in my head later on.
That's a great tip. We didn't cover that, and that is key if you are traveling. Carry your stuff. If it's important to you, it stays on you.
And make dinner reservations if you're traveling the night before somewhere where you know it's going to have what you need.
Good one.
Yeah,
good.
That's all.
All right. Well, I think I'll wrap us up with remember to enjoy yourself out there. That we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and you're going in to do a hard thing. That's part of what this is we're challenging ourselves. We're doing hard things, but remember that you should be finding joy in that process too, and not just the process of training, but the process of racing. Remember to soak in the environment. Remember, sort of coming off that mantra that I just shared, the day is going to end and it's going to move on and it's going to be a memory. So, make sure when you get to the end of the day that you feel like you enjoyed yourself also and soaked in everything that you wanted to get out of the day itself, not just the time on the clock or the time on your watch or what have you. Enjoy, have fun. That's the underlying reason why we do this, even if it's type 2 fun. All right. So thank you for joining us for Race Week Prep. Again, this is the More Miles podcast. We are the More Miles Run Coaching team. You can find our podcast wherever you like to listen. Search for the More Miles podcast. You can find our website at moremilestogo.com, and you can find us on social media at More Miles Run Coaching. You can contact all three of us through any of those channels and learn a little bit more about what we do. We would love to chat with you. All right. Thanks for joining me, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.